Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is After the Age of Fire, episode 23, the Christmas edition. This is recorded on December 27th, 2025, the third day of Christmas. The title of this episode is Growth and Death and Other Rhythms in the Plant's Harvest. Um, it's about how the harvest of the world's plants is affected by so many rhythms and exigencies of the world around them. So, just to recap what kind of channel this is a prepping channel, but it's not your average prepping channel. We're reviewing the last 250 years where the human race has been multiplying our consumption of just about everything every 22 years. By now we're using more than 1,000 times more than we did 250 years ago. The average person is using 100 times more than was normal 250 years ago. Of course, some people use much more, but this kind of multiplying, it's called exponential growth. This can't continue forever, and we're coming somewhere close to the end of it. So I've been reviewing with you for the last months that cycle of growth and how much we could hope for to harvest long term, especially how much energy we could hope to continue obtaining. Right now we obtain about 46,000 calories per person per day of fuel. Most of that is coal, oil, and gas, and then a little bit of it is from solar, wind, and nuclear and hydro, about a tenth of it, and then another 15,000 or so from food, fodder, and lumber. So for a total on average worldwide of around 60,000. And can we continue this harvest? Um, and then what we're prepping for in this channel is what will happen, how we can prepare for what happens when this multiplication by 2 ends, and we're probably within the next 50 to 100 years we'll actually have a bit less energy per person than we do now. Perhaps only 15,000 calories of fuel. That would be about a third of what we have now on average. Maybe for some brief period we'll have more fuel per person per day than we do now, but that won't last too long, and within 50 to 100 years we'll be back to where we are now and decreasing. We'll never completely run out of fuel, but we'll certainly have less energy on hand than we do now. So, but and how do you prepare for that new era, one where we're not exploding in terms of multiplying, but where how do we prepare ourselves and our families to flourish and thrive in a new world, one with all the technologies, all the inventions, and everything that we have today, but less fuel and other resources on offer per person. Still a lot more than it was 250 years ago, but less. And that's what this prepping is about: how to increase the chances that your family line will continue and will know how to flourish under new circumstances. Um, so right now we're still in the first phase of the book of the channel, where we're talking about the past. The past is the exponential growth and what our energy budget looks like and what we're likely to be able to sustain. Um, and so far, what we've found is that coal, oil, and gas, the difficulty of obtaining them will increase. So sooner or later, at least as long as we insist on obtaining them with the current ease and with the current small amount of work that we expend to get them, then we'll find that we have less on offer. And then we examined in detail twice the renewables, what are called renewables, what are called green energy, and found that they can't supply more than a fraction of our current energy consumption. They just take too much effort, and we'll never be willing to go to enough effort to produce 46,000 calories per person per day, maybe 15,000, but not 46,000 calories. And what's left is plants, food, fodder, and lumber. And so now we're going through plants and how they harvest energy in detail to see if there's any way that we could increase our harvest of energy from the world's plants. Um, so we started into that in the last episode, episode 22. And there's plants harvest approximately 1 out of 300 calories that come from the sun that are received by the world's land. Only 1 out of 300 turns into plant material, into carbs mostly. And so we're looking at that factor of 300, why they get such a small fraction of the sun's energy, why they keep so much of it, so little of it, and why we get only 1/11th of that. They harvest on average about 170,000 calories per person per day. That's all the world's plants divided between all the world's people, and we keep about 15,000 of them, of those 170,000. And so that factor of 300 energy loss, in other words, there's 6 million calories per person coming from the sun and arriving at the Earth's surface. Only 170,000 are harvested by the world's plants, and we keep 15,000 for ourselves. And that factor of 300 difference between 6 million and 6 million and 170,000, I think maybe 60 million. I think I have a digit wrong. That's that factor of 300 difference breaks down into smaller factors which multiply out to 300. The first factor is a factor of 5. It's the difference between the harvest that we get on the world's best land, world's best cropland, harvests 1 out of 60 calories, and that compares to the average across all the world's land, which is 1 out of 300. So we reviewed that in the last episode, episode 22, why there's this factor of 5 difference between the world's best land and the world's average land. And then today we'll be talking about another factor of 3 difference. This is a difference having to do with different rhythms, natural rhythms, and things that plants have to adapt to even on the world's best land. And then in the next couple episodes, episodes 24 and 25, we'll talk about the last factor. It's a factor of 20 caused by things that happen inside the world's plants. So a factor of 5 in the last episode, having to do with the best land. A factor of 3 in this episode, having to do with rhythms and adaptation. And a factor of 20 in the next episodes inside of plants. You multiply those out and you get the factor of 300 energy loss that the world's plants actually attain. So now the factor of 3 that I'm talking about in this episode is a lot about natural rhythms, including life and death and seasons and so on, and somehow it's very appropriate to Christmas. I didn't plan it this way, but somehow it just meshes perfectly. And so I'll say a little bit about Christmas at the end. So the world's best land harvests 1 out of 60 calories, but in our laboratories, completely artificial settings, in our laboratories we can the same plants can harvest 1 out of 20 calories, so a factor of 3 better, and that's how we know that the difference is a factor of 3. And I want to talk about why plants do worse even on the world's best cropland than they do in our labs. So that's what this episode is about. So, and it really has to do with different rhythms, and there are a lot of them if you think about it. The most important one is the life cycle of each plant. And just to recap, these are things that we all know, but we often don't like to think about because we don't like to think about our own death or in fact about anything pertaining to death. Life cycle starts with a period of waiting. Nothing seems to be happening, and then a period of vigorous growth begins. And during this growth, as a plant or an animal is getting started, it adapts to its environment, and it adapts in a way that marks it for the rest of its life. So you can talk about childhood scars and things like that, but every organism does this. Every organism is a lot different because of the way it got started. And then there's this period of vigorous growth continues, and you could think approximately of childhood and adolescence for a human, but all organisms do this, and the peak function of an organism is at the end of this period of vigorous growth. More or less for a human, it's at the end of adolescence in the very early adult years. By the time you're 25, it's pretty much over. And then you enter into a period of gradual decline. In humans, we call this adulthood. And this can last quite a while, where you're functioning not too far from peak, but gradually your function is decreasing. And then sooner or later you enter a period of rapid decline and death. So this might happen for different people. It happens at different ages. Some people arrive at this even without sickness when they're 60, other people when they're 85. And then lastly, after death, a period of decomposition and recycling into the environment. This is true no less for plants than it is for people. So the peak growth, the peak efficiency at harvesting sunlight is at the end of a plant's adolescence, before it's completely done producing its fruit. By the time it has ripe fruit or ripe grain, it's well past this period of peak growth, and it's not operating at full efficiency anymore because it's aged. So if you look at the entire life cycle for a plant, and look at the whole thing, you'll find that it's never, except for that exceptional period at the end of the vigorous growth phase, and as it's entering into maturity, the rest of the time it's not harvesting at full efficiency. And that's part of the factor of 3 energy loss, the fact that plants only for a brief time operate at full efficiency. Another rhythm that plants have to deal with are the seasons. So we have wet and dry seasons, we have warm and cold seasons, and as you know, in much of the world away from the equator, this is such a big difference that between seasons that most plants just drop their leaves or die yearly, or even if there are several dry seasons, or then it could be more than yearly. There's also a night and day cycle that a plant has to deal with. There's sleeping and waking. You might not know, but plants do need some downtime. They need some time when they can rest and don't have to deal with the sunlight. There's also a rhythm having to do with the sun tracing its arc across the sky. So there's maximum sunlight sometime around noon, and less sunlight before and after that. There's also rhythms having to do with the clouds and the brightness of the sunlight. There's temperature that changes every day, and many times in a day. There's humidity. There's dry and wet soil. There's also longer term rhythms like droughts and floods and forest fires. And then there are very long rhythms like the rhythm of the glacial maxima, which we call ice ages, but the real word is glacial maxima. That's when the last one was around 20,000 years ago, when much of the northern hemisphere was covered in glaciers. And then there's the minima. We're in one right now when the glaciers are in retreat. So all of these are rhythms that the world's plants have to deal with, and that having to adapt to it and flourish in that requires some energy, and that's what we're talking about in this episode. So how do we know that it's a factor of 3 loss of energy? The reason why we know is that we have constructed laboratories where we tried to insulate plants from all these rhythms and other exigencies, and tried to force feed them as if they were bacteria in a petri dish, and they got a factor of 3 better. They got 1 out of 20 calories, not 1 out of 60. So I'll talk about this in 2 steps. One is a step that will take you from 1 out of 60 calories to 1 out of 30 calories. In other words, a factor of 2 improvement, not a factor of 3 improvement. And this is the step of just trying to get rid of the life cycle. So when plants get started growing, they lose a lot. When our crops get started growing, they lose a lot of energy because they're tiny little seeds in the midst of an expanse of soil, of dirt, and they don't cover very much of that dirt with their leaves. So an awful lot of sunlight gets wasted during those first weeks, because the sunlight is just hitting the dirt and not the leaves, while we wait for the leaves to grow bigger and more of them. So what you can do in a laboratory, it won't give you a good harvest if you do it on a field, but you can do it in a lab, is you can plant lots of seeds very close together so that by day 5 they completely cover the land in your lab with leaves. So it's a very artificial thing to do. Another thing you do is you have the lights off until you plant your seeds, which you absolutely can't do in real life. So you count only the energy from when you plant your seeds until when you harvest your plants. And then you let them grow as fast as they can in this light. And once the plant is grown, while it's at maximum efficiency toward the end of its vigorous growth phase, just as it's entering maturity, you harvest it. You turn off the lights, you close the doors, and you harvest your plants, and you take what seed you get. Why do you do it before the seeds grow to their fullest? Because this is the time, it was during the vigorous growth phase that the plant was operating at maximum efficiency. If you keep waiting until when a farmer would usually harvest, then the plant is already aged and it's not at its maximum efficiency. So you're losing more sunlight during those last days. So you harvest as soon as it's starting to lose its efficiency, and that way you get the most from your plant, from your sunlight, even though this is not a good way to generate a good crop in the field. Okay, so this is just a way of trying to ensure that a plant experiences only its vigorous growth phase. You don't pay any attention to the waiting phase beforehand. You have the lights off and the experiment hasn't started, and you kill the plant before it has a chance to really experience adulthood or decline or death. Certainly you don't give any time to the recycling and the rotting and so on. It's as if you were able to turn the sun on and off. So this will give you a factor of 2 improvement in the crop's efficiency. So the plants will get 1 out of 30 calories instead of 1 out of 60 calories from the sun. Or another way of saying is that it'll get 2 out of 60 calories instead of 1 out of 60 calories. Okay, so we can do a little better. We can increase that from 2 out of 60 to 3 out of 60 if we take some additional measures, again in labs. Okay, and this next set of steps are things you do to make sure that the plant doesn't have to adapt to its environment at all, to anything around it. You're essentially just force feeding it, and like bacteria in a petri dish. So what do? You First of all, you put it under constant conditions, so nothing ever changes around the plant as it grows. It's one of the conditions would be you keep the humidity at 70%. Humidity is very important to a plant. We'll get into that in the next episodes. You have a steady wind speed, always the same, every minute, every hour, every day. You keep the lights above the plant, always at the same height above the plant. So as the plant grows taller, you raise the lights. So it as far as it can tell, the lights are always at the same position. It's not getting closer to them at all, and it's not having to adjust where its leaves should be in order to deal with the light. You have the lights on 20 hours a day. You let them be off for 4 hours a day so the plant can rest, and and you keep the temperature almost the same, a little cooler at night than during the day, but the same every day, the same every night. You keep the plants, you may have understood already that of course this is not outdoors, can do these things outdoors. They're in some sort of lab, and you fill this lab with several times more carbon dioxide than is normal, because all things being equal, plants grow better when there's more carbon dioxide in the air. All things being equal, okay? I'll come to that in a minute. And then one last thing you'll do is hydroponics, which means that instead of the plant having to grow roots to harvest to get whatever it needs to grow from the ground, you give them a sort of a baby milk sort of solution. What you do is, instead of normal soil, instead of soil at all, you provide for them something like granules of melted rock or gravel or baked clay or plastic that they can put what roots that they do grow into this thing, but it's something that's completely dead, and it's completely under your control, and very importantly, it allows water to pass through it. And so the actual hydroponic material underneath the plant has no nutritional value at all for the plant, unlike real soil. So what you do is you pump liquid, mostly water, through that. So it needs to be very good for allowing water to pass through it. This water, you'll make sure that it has plenty of nutrients for the plants to suck up, and you'll also make sure that it has plenty of oxygen in it. So you put oxygen and essentially liquid fertilizer into this water, and you keep pumping it past the plant's roots. And the point of this is that the plant is being force-fed this baby milk all the time, and it essentially doesn't have to grow roots, hardly anything. Whereas normal plants have to grow much more extensive roots, and the more roots they grow, the better. So they have to, this one, it's all right there, like potato chips, just waiting for you in a bag. So that's hydroponics for you. And if you do all these things, and you may have noticed it requires quite a bit of effort to do all of these things for a plant, the plant will be able to get 1 out of 20 calories from the sun instead of the 1 out of 30 that it would get if you just limited its life cycle. So this is how we know that the factor is a factor of 3 and not some other number. Okay. Because we've actually done it in a lab. Well, we've done it for certain grains in a lab because we care most about the energy harvest from grains. So, and then I want to make one very important point, which is that this factor of 3 energy loss due to adapting to soil and to humidity and to going through the life cycle and seasons and so on, all the things I've just discussed. There's really no way we're ever going to help the world's plants to improve on that factor of 3. We can't. we can't get a better energy harvest than they can while dealing with the same rhythms and so on. So let's talk about why. Okay, well, first of all, we can't turn the sun on and off. So what else could we do? Well, we could instead harvest the sun's light ourselves with solar panels, and then have maybe the plants underneath the solar panels, and then we could give them a steady supply of light from our own lights. So we do the direct harvesting from the sunlight, and then we give it to the, and we cope with the night and day sort of, and the overcast and bright light, and we just give the plants a steady supply. Okay. Well, the problem is that affordable solar panels, as I've discussed in a previous episode, when I had an entire episode on solar power, affordable ones cannot get a factor of cannot harvest even 1/3 of the sun's light. It's more like 1/5. That's with an absolutely new, clean solar panel, and there's no prospect that they'll ever be able to harvest 1/3. So that means that if we did try to harvest light using solar panels, we would already be losing more than 1/3 of the sun's light, and that means that we have no possibility of helping plants get better than a factor of 3 energy loss, because our solar panels lose more than a factor of 3. So we can't make up for it that way. We can't insulate them from the sun's from the night and day with solar panels. Not to mention that solar panels and batteries are tremendously expensive. Okay, well, so we can't insulate plants from night and day and so on. Nor can we, in the field and real farms, adjust the seed spacing to plant them really close together so they have the land covered with leaves within 5 days, or we can't adjust when to harvest the plants and so on like they do in labs, because we already know very well how to get the best harvest. We've played with these things a lot. We've had billions of farmers, literally billions, figuring out how to get the best yield from every single crop that we grow, and we already know very well what will give you the best yield. So the things that happen in labs will just kill your yield. Can't do it. So what else? Well, you could build greenhouses like they do in labs. Okay. The problem is with greenhouses is that, of course, we do build greenhouses, but the problem is that the energy cost and the cost of other resources of building and maintaining a greenhouse is always more than the improvement in the amount of energy that you get out of the greenhouse. There's a simple proof of that. We don't use greenhouses to house our grains. Our grains or any of our grains or oil crops. We just don't grow energy crops, either grains or oils, in greenhouses. We use greenhouses to get nice produce or exotic produce that we couldn't get otherwise. We don't use it to increase our energy because we know that we're going to lose more energy building that greenhouse than we are going to get by getting a little extra grain from the greenhouse. So, and the reason is, of course, that plants already have very sophisticated ways of getting the best yield, the best harvest, even in difficult circumstances, when there are frosts or in with different amounts of water or sunlight and so on. They know how to cope with that, and they know how to do it very efficiently. And our greenhouses are a way of coping with natural things that happen, but they aren't quite as efficient as the ways that the plants already have in place. What else could we do? We could try to grow all our crops in hydroponic materials. Well, no, we can't. Sorry, can't replace all the world's farmland and replace it all with with clay beads or plastic beads, and we can't pump fertilized, oxygen-rich water through all the world's fields. It's just not possible. Well, okay. There's one thing we could do, and this is just to throw it out there. Um, One way to increase plants' yields. This is only if all other things are equal. For instance, if this has no other side effects. Okay, I'm not going to discuss side effects much here. I might get around to it in some episode someday. But all things being equal, say inside of a greenhouse, if you multiply the amount of carbon dioxide in that greenhouse by 3 or by 5, you will certainly get a better yield. The plants will grow better. They'll give you more fruit, more grain, whatever. It's because plants are starving for carbon dioxide, as we'll get to in the next couple episodes. There just isn't, well, from a plant's point of view, maybe not from our point of view, there just isn't much carbon dioxide in the air. There's less than 1,000th of the air is carbon dioxide. So plants wouldn't mind having a bit more of it around. That's all things being equal. Of course, if more carbon dioxide were to mean that every other year your plants would be visited by a hurricane, um, then then perhaps that would counterbalance the improved harvest. But all things being equal, plants will grow better with more carbon dioxide. I will get around someday, I think, to talking about the effects of having more carbon dioxide in the air, things like global warming and climate change and so on that people talk about. All I can say right now is that, well, as I've pointed out before, for all the talk about trying to decrease our carbon dioxide production, we continue to consume more and more every year. So it seems like the talk is useless. We're still bent on multiplying our energy consumption year on year. And the only place where we get energy really is from coal, oil, and gas, and from plants. Less a tenth of our energy consumption is from other sources, and that's not going to change much. But another thing is that so far we seem pretty far in terms of daily life. Certainly we all experience weather, and perhaps we're being told that every kind of weather that we experience is a consequence of global warming or climate change. Well, perhaps, but the fact is that there was weather 50 years ago and 500 years ago, in extreme weather back then, and it's hard to tell for sure whether the extreme weather is even more extreme now than it was 500 years ago. So one thing you can be sure of is that we don't seem to be on the edge of dying as a race. If we were, we'd always see the hundreds of millions dying because of weather. We don't seem to be quite there yet. So there's some room for debate about the consequences of carbon dioxide for the human race and for other species. But there's really no room for debate about the fact that if you fill a greenhouse with more carbon dioxide than is usual, the plants will grow better. So there are the debatable things and the undebatable things, and it's just beyond debate that plants grow better with more carbon dioxide. Now, whether, considering all the pros and cons of carbon dioxide, whether one would want to have more carbon dioxide is another matter. So overall, this factor of 3, energy loss, from all the rhythms and cycles and the natural rhythm of waiting and growth and death, and of adapting to the world as it is, um, there's really no point in trying to help plants grow in a different world than this one. Okay, they do better at coping with rhythms and adapting to the world than we can help them with. That's why our greenhouses are never a winning proposition in terms of energy, and neither are hydroponics or something. They're good for some things, but they're not good for getting more energy out of the plant than you spend on setting up the hydroponics or the greenhouse. Just plants do better, and there's no point in trying to help them out with that. So this factor of 3, energy loss, is not one that I'm going to come back to and reconsider later on about whether we could help plants along. We could perhaps help plants along with helping them have a better land, better watered land that helps them, that's more suited to them. Then perhaps we could help with that factor of 5 that I discussed in the last episode. And perhaps, this seems less likely to me, perhaps we could help plants with what goes on inside them, the factor of 20, energy loss, because of how their internals work. That's what I'll be talking about in the next couple episodes. Okay, but with this factor of 3, there's really no point in coming back to it. And now I'll seg into a few words about Christmas. There's something beautiful and right about the real world, about living in the real world, the one with the seasons and all the different challenges and things that a plant has to deal with, or we have to deal with. There's something right and beautiful even about life and death. Somehow it just makes sense. A world with plants that would live forever and never had to deal with, well, maybe the tropics are a bit like, even in the tropics plants die. There's just something right about it. So I think the idea of trying to short circuit this, trying to make the whole world be a lab, or trying to help plants grow in an artificial situation may sound appealing logically, but it's a really perverted sort of logic, a perverse logic, one with no faith in life and no faith in God. A real logic, one that deserves the name, would be interested in the real world and living with this one and making the best of it we can, not in building a new one. And in fact, that's another way of saying, there's really no point. We'll never get as good from that artificial world as we get from the one we have now. We can do something better with this world maybe, but trying to restart, no. You'll always get inferior results. Now that's true just with the world that the human race has known for thousands and millions of years, all the ins and outs of this world and all the difficulties and rhythms and cycles, the droughts and the rainy seasons and so on. But there's also that's just something beautiful and right about it. But there's another level going beyond that, deeper than that, which uses all of that language and all of that experience and all of the words of the seasons of life and death and everything else, and takes it to another level. And somehow all of this real world stuff is the foundation of the Christian story. Story that we have where it's not just a story, of course, where somehow there's something more than death and more than life, and something, and we use all of that experience to tell a deeper story, that there's something more to the human than just what we do on this earth. It allows us to witness to and to observe an inversion, that things are being turned upside down and have been permanently. That somehow the death was just as important as the life. And that's, and to say that a certain baby that had no place in this world and nobody cared, certainly no powerful person cared at all about that baby, somehow is the center of it all, and the hope of every human being. So if we didn't have all these exigencies, all the cycles that I've listed, we wouldn't have any real hope for the human race or for any of us individually. We just have a lot of things to do, a lot of pleasures to be had, and so on. Instead, we have not only something more beautiful and more right just in the real world as it is, but we also have the ability to understand a story that's told at Christmas and told again in Holy Week and Easter. If we stop trying to live within these rhythms, if we try to take our plants outside of these rhythms, or ourselves outside of the rhythm, out of these rhythms, we won't just get poor results. We'll just stop being human. So this is a good season. It's a great season to be thankful. It's a great season to look at the world and say, it's not what it appears to be. There's something more to it. It's not even this very cold season with most of the green gone is somehow just as vital as the rest of the year. So I wish you a beautiful Christmas. Hope you're willing to tolerate this meditation on Christmas. There really is a meaning, and there's a person who sets the world on its head and somehow makes it far more beautiful than you would think otherwise. Okay, I think that's what I have for today, and tomorrow we'll be going, the next time we'll be going on to what goes on inside of plants. You can expect that sooner or later, but quite a few more episodes later, we'll come back to some themes of faith in Jesus and of morality and so on, but that's a long time from now. In the meantime, enjoy this winter. It's beautiful. Keep coming back.